Right, so you can tell something's gone badly wrong for Israel when the person spelling it out isn't a critic or some regional rival they can laugh off, but US Ambassador Tom Barrack of all people, a man who's moved comfortably through the same US power circuits Israel depends on. When someone like that comes out and says Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, he's not trying to be provocative, he's just stating the bit everyone inside the system knows already, but never says. And that's exactly why it stings so much too. Israel's built years of policy on the claim that force can settle this, and here's one of their own effectively admitting it can't. So of course they're rattled, because they've threatened to start up war on Lebanon again, haven't they? Not that they ever really stopped during this year-long farce of a ceasefire, but also because once an insider speaks the truth plainly, you can't stuff that line in the back of the proverbial sock drawer, can you? And pretend it isn't true. Right, so Israel's cheeks are burning as they got told you aren't big enough to win in Lebanon. At least that's roughly what's happened with Tom Barrack's comment that Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah in effect. It isn't an activist line, it's anything but. It isn't rhetoric from one of the usual states in the region. It's a statement made by a man who has been stitched into the political fabric of the United States for years, who's raised money for presidents, who has business ties across the Gulf, who has been treated as part of the ecosystem Israel relies on in Washington. When someone like that says Israel cannot win, he's giving his assessment, one that mirrors what analysts and regional observers have been saying quietly for years, even if officials refuse to say it out loud. So the significance of this moment is that it strips away the last layer of pretense around Israeli military doctrine in Lebanon, because for 20 years or more, Israel has sold the idea that Hezbollah can be degraded, cornered, or eliminated if necessary. It's demanded the Lebanese state disarm the group. It's insisted that the Israeli military remains unmatched and therefore capable of forcing any outcome it chooses. That story is central to Israeli policy. But it only works if people believe it. If the myth holds, if the image of unstoppable force remains intact. And Barrack's statement lands precisely where that myth is most fragile, the gap between what Israel tells the world and what its own military planners already know. Because the truth is very simple. Hezbollah is not a militia Israel can just uproot should it wish to. It is not a temporary network. It is a deeply embedded political and military structure with a social base, an arsenal that has grown over years, and defensive positions built into geography that tends to favour them. Israel can hit targets, it can escalate, it can flatten neighbourhoods, and they absolutely have, of course. But none of that gets it the thing it claims to want, the disarmament or destruction of Hezbollah. And when someone like Barrack says it cannot be done, well, they don't like that very much, do they? If force can't deliver the outcome Israel keeps promising, then more strikes won't solve anything. At that point, Israel isn't working towards a goal, is it? It's covering the fact it doesn't actually have one. And once people start to see that, well, the usual claims of necessity stop carrying so much weight. And here's the other truth Barrack's admission forces into the open. If Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, then the demand that Lebanon disarm it is not a diplomatic position, is it? It's a stalling tactic, a blame-shifting device, a fantasy maintained because it provides Israel cover for the strikes it continues to carry out despite an alleged ceasefire being in place. Everyone knows the Lebanese state cannot disarm the group. The Lebanese army knows it. Foreign diplomats know it. Israeli officials, if they're honest with themselves, they know it too. That's why Barrack called the idea unrealistic. And that's the piece that should worry Israel the most, because once the impossibility is spoken by someone from within their own supportive network and spoken out loud, spoken publicly, it all collapses. You cannot keep demanding something the world now openly recognises cannot happen. So the question becomes, what does Israeli strategy look like once you strip away all of this illusion? And the answer, well, it is as disturbing as you might have guessed, because it exposes how much of what Israel is doing in Lebanon is actually reactive rather than purposeful. The pager attack last year is a perfect example. It was designed to disrupt Hezbollah's communication chain, take out its leadership. It was meant to signal capacity and precision, but the extent of Hezbollah's recovery remains completely unknown. And that's the point. Israel cannot quantify the damage. It cannot measure the group's remaining capability. It cannot map the full structure, which means it cannot calibrate escalation effectively. And when a state with overwhelming firepower is operating without reliable information, it's not controlling events, it's chasing them. That loss of control is what you see in the constant strikes across southern Lebanon, including the ones that even UN peacekeepers have now logged as violations of the border resolution. And of course, they've been targeted themselves, haven't they? This isn't a strategic campaign. It's an attempt to demonstrate strength where strength is actually slipping away. Because if the Israeli public starts to believe that Hezbollah cannot be defeated, then political space collapses, and Israeli leaders lose the one narrative that allows them to escalate without question. So instead of confronting the limits Barrack has now articulated, they escalate further, hoping force can still carry this illusion, even if it cannot deliver the reality. But the danger here is that the more Israel escalates, the more it exposes the limits of its power. And Hezbollah's entire strategy is built around absorbing blows and remaining operational, whilst also very much keeping its cards close to its chest by remaining on standby throughout the ceasefire. They've left the Lebanese state to try and deal with everything. They've been quiet. So it doesn't have to win in the sense Western strategists might use that word. It just has to remain capable, and with all of the unknowns, how capable they actually are, remains completely up in the air. And it has, even after assassination campaigns, even after strikes on convoys, even after drone attacks, and even after that pager incident. Nobody knows what Hezbollah has got back after that pager operation, whether they lost a chunk or they've rebuilt twice over. And that kind of uncertainty is exactly what stops Israel being able to talk about a winnable war with a straight face. You cannot defeat what you cannot fully see, cannot fully map, cannot fully neutralize, and you simply don't know the capabilities of Hezbollah anymore because they've been quiet for a year. They've had a year to rebuild and recover. Barrack's comment about recruitment was another point. Western audiences aren't used to hearing from insiders. He used the official designation for Hezbollah because he has to, but his point cut through the label. His point was about the pattern seen in long-standing armed political movements where removing individual fighters does not remove the broader structure that replaces them over time. They don't disappear when you eliminate the fighters, they regenerate, and regeneration is a far more dangerous capability than firepower. Because regeneration means time favours them, as I nodded to a moment ago, not their opponent. They've had more than a year now since that pager attack. Israel's military can destroy stockpiles, it can take out commanders, but it cannot destroy the political, social and ideological base that produces those fighters. Barrack didn't spell out every implication, but his wording points towards the broader structural reality that such groups are not dismantled by removing individual figures. Israel's strategic goal is impossible because the structure it wants to dismantle does not depend on a single leader, a single bunker, or a single warehouse. It's distributed, it's embedded, it's resilient. This is where the UN peacekeeper incidents come back into the picture, actually, but only as evidence of a deeper point. Israel is still carrying out strikes in territory monitored by the UN, and the UN is calling these strikes what they are, violations of the ceasefire architecture. Lebanon, meanwhile, arrested 6 men who fired on peacekeepers, so the contrast is rather stark, isn't it? The state that is meant to be the stabilising force is undermining the very resolution designed to keep the border calm. The state that is meant to be incapable of enforcing order is actually doing exactly that. And you can see why Israel feels the need to push harder then, because if Lebanon is functioning in the narrow areas where Israel insists it is not, then it's Israel that's losing the argument that only its military actions can maintain stability. The narrative Israel uses to justify violations starts to fall apart all on its own. And when narratives break apart, the politics behind them starts to shake. Israel's entire regional posture relies on the perception of overwhelming superiority. So the moment its adversaries or its neighbours or its own allies start to believe that superiority actually has limits, Israeli deterrence shrinks. And deterrence isn't about the hardware, it's about belief. If Hezbollah believes Israel cannot defeat it, that changes Hezbollah's risk calculations, as it would anybody's. If the Lebanese state believes Israel cannot eliminate the group, that changes diplomatic space. If Israeli citizens begin to believe the military cannot deliver the decisive outcomes politicians promise, the domestic political cost becomes more severe. And if US insiders start saying these things out loud, well, that tells you the foreign policy establishment is preparing for a bit of a shift, doesn't it? Because here's the thing Israel has always understood but never admits. It survives diplomatically because its allies believe in its military competence. Competence is the foundation of indulgence. Allies overlook violations because they think Israel delivers stability, or at least prevents worse outcomes. But if someone like Barrack is saying Israel cannot achieve its primary strategic objective in Lebanon, that confidence erodes. And once the confidence erodes, so does the indulgence. States stop covering for you so much when they think you're escalating out of insecurity rather than strength. And that's exactly what the current pattern is starting to look like. Israel's not acting like a state with strategic clarity. It's acting like a state boxed into a corner it put itself in. It spent years insisting Hezbollah can be destroyed. It spent years insisting Lebanon must disarm the group. It spent years insisting every strike, every escalation, every breach is part of a necessary long-term plan. But if the plan is impossible, then the actions become incoherent. And incoherent action is dangerous, not just for Lebanon, but for Israel. That's why Barrack's statement matters. Not because it introduces new information, but because it removes the last excuse for ignoring what's been true for years. Hezbollah is not a beatable opponent. What Barrack has done is put the truth into the one place Israel cannot easily dismiss, the mouth of someone from inside its own orbit. So you might be thinking by this point, Damo, if Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, then what is the point of continued escalation? What's the purpose of pushing strikes deeper and deeper into Lebanese territory? What is the aim behind violating border arrangements that have held on for years? Well, if the goal is deterrence, the strikes are failing. If the goal is elimination, the strikes are meaningless. And if the goal is to pressure Lebanon into policing the group, then Israel is undermining the very state capacity it claims to want. You cannot bomb a border region, violate a UN resolution, and then insist the Lebanese state demonstrate stability. That contradiction exposes the emptiness of the entire strategy, surely. The Lebanese state matters because they prove the Lebanese state can act when it chooses. The UN statements matter because they prove Israel is not acting within the bounds it claims. But these are supporting details. The core remains what Barrack put on the table. Israel cannot win the war it threatens to start. And once you accept that, everything happening on that border starts to look less like strength and more like an attempt to mask strategic failure. And here's the thing Western audiences are not used to confronting. Israeli military doctrine in Lebanon has been running on fumes for years. The idea of mowing the grass, periodic strikes to degrade capability, only works if the grass doesn't grow back faster than you cut it. Hezbollah's structure ensures that it does. It absorbs loss, it decentralizes, it disperses, it embeds, it regenerates. It's what it's done before. It could well be doing it now. It's had a year that it could have been doing this. Israel's strategy requires decisive outcomes. Hezbollah's strategy simply requires survival. So those two aims are very different. One is far harder to achieve than the other, and it's in the impossible one Israel keeps claiming that it can deliver. So when Barrack says Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, he's not announcing a shift in military reality, he's simply announcing a shift in political willingness to pretend otherwise. So once that illusion's gone, Israel faces a crisis of strategic identity, because Israel's entire posture depends on convincing its neighbours, its public and its allies that it is capable of decisive, surgical, overwhelming military victory. The state is built on the idea that it cannot be cornered, but that image depends on maintaining the fiction that all problems can be solved by force. And the more Israel lashes out with strikes, with assassination, with cross-border operations, not uniquely to Lebanon, other states as well, the more it demonstrates that it is hitting walls, not windows. When you strike out of weakness and not strength, every action becomes a tell, and the tells are everywhere. The admissions from analysts that a full-scale war would be catastrophic, the concern from military planners that northern Israel is unprepared for sustained missile fire, the acknowledgement from US officials that they could not back another major regional conflict, and now Barrack's statement, which cuts through all the political fog surrounding this and names the strategic reality in no uncertain terms. Israel cannot achieve the objective it has built its entire rhetoric around. And this is the part that leaves Israel politically exposed. If you cannot defeat Hezbollah, then demanding its disarmament is a diplomatic non-starter. If disarmament is impossible, then escalation becomes pointless. And if escalation is pointless, then violating the UN buffer zone is simply reckless. Israel's actions in the UNIFIL area show a state trying to project dominance where dominance is slipping away. The strikes aren't part of a plan, they're part of an identity crisis, a refusal to accept limits even as those limits are closing in around them. Lebanon's arrest of those gunmen who attacked a UN patrol is symbolic, but not because it shows strength. It's symbolic because it shows functionality. And functionality undermines Israel's claim that Lebanon is incapable of policing the border. If the Lebanese army can move quickly when peacekeepers are shot at, then Israel's argument that only it can guarantee stability falls flat. And when the UN publicly logs Israeli violations of the ceasefire framework, their moral hierarchy collapses further with it. But again, these are the supporting details. The heart of the matter is what Barrack exposed. Israel's military cannot deliver the victory it promises. Once you strip away that promise, the politics that rely on it becomes hollow. So what does deterrence even mean when the other side knows you cannot win decisively? What does escalation mean when the aim is unachievable? What does regional diplomacy look like when Israel's allies quietly begin adjusting to a reality where Israeli power is not absolute, but actually constrained? Constrained Israel is not something Washington likes to discuss openly, is it? It prefers the story of partnership and shared values and mutual interests and making sure Israel's got the biggest guns in the region. But those narratives depend on Israel being a reliable regional enforcer of Western objectives too. If Israel is now seen as a state whose military options are narrowing, whose deterrence is slipping, and whose political leadership is trapped in cycles of escalation that cannot deliver success, then Washington's calculus begins to shift too. Barrack's statement is a signal of that shift, an early, careful, establishment-friendly way of saying the quiet part out loud. Israel cannot do what it says it can. That has consequences, because once doubt creeps in, it spreads. US strategists begin to reconsider red lines. Regional governments begin recalculating risk. Hezbollah feels less pressure to compromise. Iran sees confirmation of its long-term strategies. Lebanon, fragile though it is, gains a sliver of diplomatic space. And Israel loses the one thing it cannot afford to lose, the perception of inevitability. Israel's power has always been part real, part performative. The real part is substantial, with the sophisticated weapons, backed by the world's most powerful military partner, with intelligence networks and technological reach that few states can match. But the performative part, the idea that Israel always wins, is just as important, and that performative part is falling apart. Barrack didn't cause the collapse, he simply named it, he pointed it out. So you can see why Israeli officials would be furious. Because if the perception of inevitable victory disappears, the deterrence fractures and diplomacy shifts and domestic politics destabilise. Israeli leaders know they cannot publicly admit limitations, so when an insider does it for them, the political cost is severe. It tells the public that the threats they've been hearing have no deliverable ending. It tells the military that escalation will not bring security. It tells opponents that Israel is stretched. And it tells allies that Israel is not the anchor they might have thought it was. So this is the moment when states either reassess or double down. And Israel, of course, is doubling down. The strikes across the south of Lebanon, the violations of the buffer zone, the refusal to acknowledge what the UN is documenting. These are the actions of a state that cannot afford to appear constrained, even as the world begins to see the constraints clearly. It's a political theatre performed with live ammunition, and the risk is enormous. Because if Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, but continues to act as though it can, it moves closer to a conflict it cannot win. And a conflict Israel cannot win is not simply a military failure, it's an existential political rupture. And let's face it, its track record in Lebanon isn't a great one as it is. Israeli society is built on the belief that the state can keep its citizens safe. Hezbollah's capabilities, thousands of rockets, anti-tank systems, hardened defensive positions, threaten that belief. And Barrack's admission forces the public to confront that. This is where the deeper strategic problem lies. Israel has no path to eliminate Hezbollah. It has no path to force disarmament. It has no path to reconstruct Lebanon's politics through military means in a way it sees fit. And it has no path to restore deterrence through continued low-intensity strikes. The strategy's broken. And Barrack, whether intentional or not, just said so. The Lebanese state is fragile, but it understands the balance better than most. And that's why it plays this careful game of enforcing stability where it can, avoiding provocations where it cannot, maintaining enough distance from Hezbollah to placate Western donors, while remaining realistic about power on the ground. The Lebanese army's actions after the peacekeeper attack fit that same pattern. Demonstrate responsibility, avoid escalation, uphold international law. It's the only workable posture for a state trapped between internal factions and an aggressive neighbour. And that posture becomes more credible, not less, when Israel's own strategy is exposed as hollow. This is the political reality Barrack has laid out in plain English, whether he intended to or not. Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah. It can destroy infrastructure, it can level neighbourhoods, it can escalate, but it cannot dismantle this group. And if it cannot dismantle the group, it cannot achieve the outcome its political rhetoric keeps on promising. The gap between rhetoric and reality is far too wide now to just keep on ignoring. And once that gap becomes more visible, the less the political centre can hold on to the narrative. Israel is escalating on a front where escalation cannot deliver victory. It is violating a ceasefire framework it claims to uphold. It's undermining stability in a region where it insists only its strength prevents chaos. And now even its own allies are saying the quiet part out loud, that the enemy Israel wants to eliminate is not one it can defeat. That truth doesn't weaken Hezbollah, it weakens Israel's political foundations, because you cannot build a strategy on wishes. You cannot fight a war you cannot win. And you cannot keep pretending inevitability is strength when someone from inside your own camp has just told the world the opposite. That's why Israel is reeling. Not because Hezbollah has changed, but because the story Israel tells about itself has cracked, and now the world can see the fracture. And once that story breaks, power shifts. Sometimes slowly, sometimes fast, but it always shifts. And it's just shifted against Israel here. Somewhere else it's shifted against Israel is apparently in Egypt, as it happens, the mediator state, the erstwhile ally of Israel. Why would they clash then, Damo? Well, Israel talking of opening up Rafah and letting people into Egypt might do it. Israel claims Egypt is on side with this. Egypt claims no knowledge at all. So what is going on? Find out here. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, of course, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.